Hey everyone, this is Kevin from thechesswebsite.com, and today we are in round 5 of our coverage of the 2017 U.S. Chess Championships. It's been a pretty crazy tournament so far. We've had fireworks the entire way through, and today is going to be no exception. White's going to be played by Ray Robson, 22-year-old American phenom. In 2008, he became the youngest grandmaster ever from America, so pretty cool to see him. We've almost been waiting for him to just take over American chess. In 2015, he got second in this tournament. It seems like he's always up near the top some of his tournaments he's playing, so looking for him to kind of break through. He did lose in round 1 to Nakamura, but since then he does have a victory in this tournament. So if he can get a victory here, that will push him near the top of the leaderboard, just be slightly behind Wesley. So his opponent playing the black pieces is Alex Shabalov. Not had the best tournament so far. Lost his first 3 games and then ended up squeaking out a tie in round 4. But if you remember, this guy does not like to play regular openings, does not like to play conservative. He likes to play very aggressive. He does not like draws at all. So he's going to be looking for a victory, get back on track, and see if he can make something of this tournament. Ray decides to go and start with pawn to e4. Pawn g6, pawn d4. So I say, if you're going to allow me to control this area of the board, I will do that with my pawns. Bishop g7, fianchetto, more of a hyper-modern defense. Knight c3, pawn c6, getting ready to go for more of that Kato-kan. And usually we see knight to f3 here, and then after a knight to h6, maybe pawn to h3, bishop to e2 if you want to play a little bit more conservative, maybe bishop to c4, bishop down here, b3, castle on the king side. That's usually how white progresses in this opening. Ray Robson decides to go a little bit different and plays pawn to f4. I almost never see pawn to f4 played at high level. So always really cool to see new theoretical openings coming about these big tournaments. I feel like we've seen a lot of that so far just in the games that we've covered in the 2017 U.S. Chess Championship. Pawn to d5, continuing with the Kato-kan. Pawn to e5, very common, just solidifying this pawn chain. Really pushing material as much as possible. There's a lot of air in front of the white king. It's going to be tough for him to castle on the queen side just because black can easily start to attack on the queen side. But you can see if he castles on the king side, there's still a lot of room for black to kind of get in behind enemy lines and start to attack. So if white decides to castle on the king side, he's going to need to make sure he does have a very strong attack. Knight to h6 as expected, knight here to f3, and then pawn to f6. And I'm not really sure why you would play pawn to f6. If you fianchetto to one side of the board, your pawn chain really starts to deteriorate if you move either your pawns. It doesn't matter if it's the H pawn or your F pawn. It's going to be pretty weak. So I thought he might just castle on the king side. This seems completely fine to me. But I guess he just decided to try something a little bit more aggressive, and pawn to f6 is definitely more aggressive. Bishop to e3. Castle on the king side, pawn to h3, blocking off this critical square here on g4. The bishop could have even come down earlier instead of castling, but that puts a stop to that. Knight can't come here. So this light square bishop doesn't have too many great squares that he can come to right away. Queen to b6 decides, okay, can't do too much on the king side. I'll go and start to focus over here on the queen side of the board. White continues with queen to d2, and then the queen takes down here on b2. And this is not your normal poison pawn variation that comes up in the Najdorf defense. That usually happens when you have both knights on the queen side of the board and you give up that pawn of material in exchange for a strong attack, trying to trap that queen on the queen side of the board, and they usually have to waste a lot of moves. That's not what this is. Ray Robson actually just says, hey, I'm going to give up that pawn of material to try to take this queen out of the equation. I want to control the semi-open file with my rook. And then, hey, if your queen's going to be preoccupied and not really in the battle, that's worth a pawn to me. So that's what he does. Rook over here to b1, kicking the queen back to a3. Now here's a few options. I really expected rook to b3, start to attack the queen a little bit. Bishop to d3, then if he wants to castle on the king side, he can. Or he could just play king up to e2. He does have protection once his bishop is here on d3. So some options here. Robson decided to go a little bit more aggressive with pawn to g4. So he recognizes his opponent is aggressive, and he's trying to be more aggressive than that, which I think is pretty cool. Knight to f7, a bishop here to d3. The pawn takes. Ray decides to capture with his d pawn. I think it also seems good to just recapture with your f pawn. This does open up this f file. If he wants to be pretty aggressive, I think this does that. He has both of his bishops eyeing down on the king side of the board. He could just play king to e2, swing his rook over here. That's going to be fine. He could also castle on the king side, connect his rooks that way as well. He does have some options, but decides to go ahead and take with his pawn from the d file. Knight here to a6, saying, hey, I need to get this knight involved into the game, but I'm going to have to use a couple moves here, because maybe knight to c5 could bring over here knight to c7. Right now over here on a6, it's not doing too much on board. Now we see white play rook to b3, forcing the queen to move. Queen a5, castle on the king side, so saying that, hey, I recognize I'm not going to have tons of king safety, but this gets my rook where I need it to. It can swing over to the queen side of the board if he does want to double up on the b file, or it can just try to also control this f file right here. So that's what he does. Pawn to e6, and then pawn up to h4. I'm not even really sure that with the lack of defense that white has, that black doesn't even have a better position right here. You know, he could have tried for something else. Bishop maybe takes on a6, and then if the queen takes, we could see bishop to c5, rook over here to e8, rook to a3, attacking the queen. The queen comes here to c4. Maybe Ray decides to exchange off, but first maybe queen to e3. He does have some options. h4 just kind of says, yeah, I'm not too worried about that. We just want to play as aggressive as possible. So that's what he decides to do. Knight to c5. We knew that knight needed to get involved into the action. And then pawn up to h5. And I think he kind of had three options. h5 is definitely one of them. I think it's actually the weakest. He could have taken with his knight on d5. And then you see the knight come down to b3. It is attacking this rook, so giving up that material. And now knight up here to e7. You may say, well, you know, this is kind of weird because now the king's going to move. How does he get this rook back? Well, he can definitely get it back, and that's because the bishop can eventually take here on g6, and we will have a fork, and we'll kind of show you what that looks like. King here to h8. After the pawn recaptures, the knight's queen down here to d2. After the bishop takes, the exchange of the queens, bishop to d7. Now after the bishop takes and the pawn recaptures, then we see the knight take on g6. We are forking the rook, and so the rook is going to fall on board. But if we kind of look at this position, white does have more pawns, but he's down a minor piece going into the endgame. I think this is going to be tough for white, and it's almost forced all the way through. There's not a lot of other variations that could actually come from that, so I think this probably gives him the highest computer rating, but I don't really like the move at all. Another one would be bishop taking on c5, and then we see the queen take, kind of has to do that. That would be check. King over here to h1, pawn down to b5, really trying to control the queen side of the board. Pawn up to a3, pawn down here to a5. I think black has a better position here as well. h5 is just really extending your pawns further than I like to in front of the king, but I also feel like this is the craziest variation and gives black more opportunities to get into a bad spot, even if this is not the best objective move for white. Now, if we look at black's side of the board, it seems pretty obvious right now where he should go. He has a rook staring at his face, ready for him to take. Knight takes on b3. The pawn recaptures, knight here to h6. I think this is completely fine. For some reason, Alex decided, I don't want your rook, I instead want your bishop. Doesn't make a lot of sense to me, but that's what he decided to do. Pawn takes on d3. You don't want to be taking necessarily with your queen here. After pawn recaptures, I just don't think this is nearly as good on board. Pawn here to b6. Decides to go ahead and take with his pawn, which, you know, I think that's fine. Now the pawn takes on h5, and Ray Robson does something he's done earlier in the game, but it seems pretty crazy. If you're not really thinking too much about what his strategy is. He plays pawn here to g5, giving up another pawn and material. He lost his pawn on h5, makes total sense to just recapture here. Then he can play king here to h1, swing his rook over here to g1, control this file, try to attack his opponent's king. He says, I don't want that pawn. I just want to push up, and I'm going to give you that material. Seems like an odd choice. So he's starting to go down pawns in material. If we continue, knight here to h8, does eventually want to come here to g6, so it can just control more of the board. Queen over here to h2, attacking the pawn. Knight here to g6, queen takes on h5, kind of saw this coming. Now the knight comes down, takes on f4, does have protection from this rook here on f4, or from the rook here on f8, so that is safe. Bishop takes, rook takes down here, knight to e2, attacking the rook, rook swings back here to f8. Knight to g3, so Ray Robson, he's down. This is not the position he's necessarily looking for. If you just from a material standpoint, he's not doing as well. His opponent has a double bishop pair, and he has queen both his rooks. It's going to be very difficult for Ray Robson to find an attack, but he continues. We see queen to c5, king here to h1 after the check, queen up here to e7, and then rook to b2. And rook to b2, anytime your opponent moves, you have to sit there and think, what is their goal for what they're doing? Are they trying to defend? Are they trying to have a strong attack? Are they trying to build something up later on? Rook to b2, it's not defending the pawn on a2. That's not what that's for. It has one specific reason, and that is rook over here to h2. It's about as telegraphed as possible because Ray doesn't have too many options on board for him to go and play rook to b2. Says, hey, I'm going to go and play rook to h2. Because of that, we almost have to see something, after queen here to f7, attacking the queen, maybe queen back here to h3. We need to see queen here to g6. Defending this square here on h7, that's a critical square. Instead, Alex decides to play pawn here to b6. There's not a lot going on the queen side of the board. Why he decides to go ahead and play pawn here to b6 kind of blows my mind. Not totally sure, but pawn to b6 is the move. Rook over here to h2, attacking the square here on h7, and then queen to g6. Unfortunately, it's a little bit too late because white just has so much more material now that he can start to throw at his opponent. Knight to h5, and then my favorite move of the game, it's bishop to a6. It says, you know what? The pawn to b6 was allowing myself to get the light square bishop involved into the game. And I'm not going to abandon that plan regardless of what you did. Even though you have a strong attack over here, I'm not going to think about it. I'm just going to play bishop to a6 even though it's not doing too much. So that's what he does. And then knight to f6, check, king to f7, and then after knight to d4, black actually, I think, looked at the board and realized I've lost, and he has resigned in this position. So congratulations to Ray Robson. A crazy game from both sides of the board. And all in all, Ray Robson, although he started out the tournament with one loss, he's come back and he has 2 victories, and he's only a half a point behind Wesley, so he's in second place right here. Now, if you look at this board and say, what are some of the variations that we could see from this position? Why is this so bad? Well, we already take a look at it and say that once this knight moves, there is a discovered attack with the rook here on f1. Okay, so let's say we try to get that out of the way. King to e7. Then we have queen to e6. And this is one of the big things, is this knight right here on d4 allows the queen to come up here to e6, check, and it's just bad from there. We have checkmate in not too long. Okay, well, what if the bishop just takes on f6? Okay, well, same kind of thing. Rook up here. The king moves. Queen here to e6. This is just going to be very, very bad news. Now, let's take a look back and say the queen's going to come here to e6. Well, what if the rook just swings over here to e8, tries to protect it a little bit? Okay, well, now knight to h7. This is the discovered attack that we talked about. King up here to g8. We see the rook take. After the rook takes, now knight here to f6. We could see the bishop take. That's fine. But now there's no way to really stop the queen coming up here. It's just all bad from here. You can even see rook here to g2. The queen is going to fall. And at the end of the day, it's going to be a very easy game for Ray Robson. So, exciting match. We've had 5 rounds so far. They've all been really fun to commentate. And just as someone that enjoys chess, I really like how these players are approaching their game. So, hopefully you enjoyed this video, and I'll see you guys in round 6.